Let's get started.
Welcome to the Financial Purpose Podcast. All opinions expressed by me or guests of the podcast are solely our own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Life Moves Wealth Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for any investment decisions. Clients of Life Moves Wealth Management may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
Welcome to the Financial Purpose Podcast. This is episode 48, and today my shirt, if you're watching, is a dead giveaway of what we're going to talk about. If you're listening, I'm wearing a shirt. This is one of my favorite shirts, and it's in the classic Enjoy Coca-Cola font, and it says, Enjoy Capitalism. And here's my bold claim, and we're going to see. So my claim is, and by the way, before I start my claim, I have about 7 pages of research here that I completed for this episode, and so I'm going to be reading a fair bit from these notes because there's a lot of really good information in here, so bear with me there. But anyway, here's the claim. So despite its criticisms, the free market capitalistic system remains the most effective economic system for creating personal wealth. There it is. Capitalism is the best ism that we have in any economic system on the planet. That's my claim. Let's talk about it. Now, this is important to me because I happen to have long enjoyed the benefits of capitalism, and so have you. And no matter what the person who is on TikTok, and I'm not going to I had an image of this person built in my mind, and you might as well, but I'm not going to describe them because I don't want to offend anybody. But typically it's going to be somebody on a social media platform, which is built by capitalism, using a smartphone, which is built by capitalism, to give their opinion about how capitalism is terrible, and their ability to express that opinion is because we live in a free society that enables a free market that enables capitalism to work. And so they're reaping the benefits of capitalism, everything from head to toe, what they wear, what they do, what they buy, their Starbucks cup, whatever it is, that mocha latte, whatever they're drinking, that's capitalism. So in his book titled An Inquiry to the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nation, Adam Smith, he wrote the following. By the way, because I'm a nerd, I own this book. I have it on my bookshelf in my office. But here's what Adam said in his book, one of the many things he said. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard of their own interest. That's capitalism, right? So it's not because we need dinner that they exist. It's because they have a product, they have a skill that they can monetize that we need and use and will buy. And so they continue to provide that because it helps them to feed their family. And so Adam Smith is often regarded as the father of capitalism due to him writing that book, which kind of laid the foundation for what we now have come to know as capitalism. And among the other ideas, he introduced the concept of the invisible hand. And it argues that individuals pursuing their own self-interests unintentionally benefit the society as a whole. And so the principle suggests that free markets, through the actions of these self-interested individuals, can allocate resources efficiently, and it promotes economic prosperity for all involved. So stated simply, the butcher, the baker, the brewer, and just about any other vocation that you can think of, we all work to serve our own interests if we're honest. The reason why we go to work is because we have to. We have to earn money, but most of us aren't satisfied with just earning money. We want a little bit more. We want a lot more, whatever it is. It's our own interest, and we expect others to be working to serve our own interest. So somebody has to cook the food that we order at the restaurant or through the drive-through window or at the supermarket, at the deli counter or wherever you're buying food. And at the same time, you have to go to work in order to receive the money to pay for that food and to pay for that meal. And that meal provides that you paid for, provides payroll for the restaurant. And then the people who have cooked your food that you've purchased, now the restaurant is paying them and they have money to go into the community. And that ultimately supports your company's ability to continue to pay you so you can repeat the cycle. So everybody benefits from being self-interested. And that's the kind of the tenet of capitalism. So you see, in my opinion, it's a beautiful system. Everybody, with a few exceptions, has the opportunity to contribute to the economy to their best and their fullest of their ability, their imagination, and their strategic determination. So you can start or even buy an existing business and carve your own path. You can be enterprising with the desire to climb the corporate ladder in your company. You can create art. You can create music that others will buy and purchase and continue to love for years to come. You can even run a nonprofit that serves a specific need in the world, and it fulfills your passion for those causes. And still, all of those things, you still are able to earn money and have your self-interest out into the world that gets appreciated by others. So you see, the best things about the free market system is self-evident. It's freedom. You have the freedom to carve your own path, and it's a beautiful thing. Now, it's not without its own warts or shortcomings, and a lot of the people who I talked about earlier who are on the social media sites talking about how terrible capitalism is, they only can point out the shortcomings, again, ignoring the fact that they benefit from it. But again, I digress. Not everyone who ventures down the same path ends up at the same place at the same time with the same outcomes. And we know that. I mean, hell, even some people just don't have the best luck or the best timing as other people do who are doing the exact same things at the exact same time for the exact same people. And so it's not guaranteed, but it is the best way to have an opportunity. So if you're not as well networked as other people, if you chose to hold back on opportunity, if you chose to delay education or, taking a risk or things like that, your outcomes aren't going to be the same. Now, for those who are quick to offer criticism on capitalism, I thought I'd be a little bit fair. And I thought I'd talk about some of the other economic systems that are of note and that have been part of the evolution of what we now know as capitalism. And so we're going to start with feudalism. Know what that is? I had to look it up just to make sure I understood it. So feudalism, it was a dominant social system in medieval Europe. It's going to start to become more familiar the more I talk, characterized by a hierarchical structure where lords owned large expanses of land and granted portions, or what's called fiefs, to vassals, which are knights, in exchange for military service and to reward loyalty. The majority of the population were peasants, or also called serfs, who worked the land and provided agricultural produce and labor in return for protection from the knights and of the lord or the laird, if you're from my favorite place, Scotland. I'm terrible at those accents, by the way. I just absolutely suck at them. But anyway, point is, that system provided some safety and a place to live and some protection from warring nations. And it was organized around what's called the manorial system, where the lord's estate or the manor functioned as a self-sufficient entity, often removed from whatever overarching government or from the crown if they were in some sort of a monarchy or something like that. So upsides of a system like feudalism is it provided a structured and stable society during a time where there were frequent invasions and frequent wars from neighboring nations, from neighboring clans, from kind of like I would say nomadic warriors, things like that. It allowed communities to be self-sufficient. Most of the goods and services were produced locally. They were consumed locally, and it reduced at that time dependency on external sources. So any trading that was done would have been done to benefit the people within that system. It wasn't because they needed outside goods in a lot of cases. It established clear roles and responsibilities. It created a sense of duty and loyalty among different social classes. So they were loyal to that region, loyal to that the lord of that land, loyal to whatever that service or maybe even that king or that queen. In their different social classes, they were very clear on where they stood. The lords had control over the territories. It allowed more responsive and flexible governance at the local level, and it was tailored to the specific needs and conditions of those lands and the people who inhabited those lands and did the work that they did based on whatever it is that they produced. By the way, if you've ever played the Settlers of Catan, this is what I think of every time I play that game, which I don't like to play very much. It's not my favorite game. I love Monopoly. I will play Monopoly with you for 100 years before I would play Catan. For some reason, it's just different for me. I don't know. I don't love it. But anyway, I always think of this kind of system when I play Settlers of Catan, the once a year or whatever. Okay, the downside of a system like feudalism, rigid class structures limit social mobility. So, if you think back to the movie A Knight's Tale, there's a line in there where he talks about how a man can change his stars. Well, the only way that Heath Ledger's character, and rest in peace Heath Ledger, gone way too soon, but the only way that character was able to change his stars was to hop into a knight's costume because the knight that he served died, and he feuded, and he was able to up his mobility, but that was very, very, very rare and very risky for that time period. So not a lot of upward mobility. Serfs were bound to the land. They had little opportunity to improve their social or economic class, and they most certainly didn't have the ability to go move to another land where there were better opportunities. That just wasn't a thing. The serfs had little incentive to improve productivity as they didn't own the land that they worked on. So there was a lot of economic stagnation because you couldn't compel any more productivity or any more output because what was the point, right? Power was highly decentralized. It led to fragmented authority. Sometimes you would have conflicts between the lords. It would weaken the central authority of the king or the queen or whatever that parliamentary type government was. They often would have to stand down to whatever rise would come from the lords of those regions, and created a lot of issues, as we know. And serfs and peasants were often exploited. They lived under harsh conditions. Really, I mean, if you can think of any movie that you've seen, if you can think of things like Braveheart, if you've ever watched any of those shows, right, The Knight's Tale, or anything that's set in that kind of medieval period, the conditions weren't that great. The serfs had to give a large portion of whatever they produced, whatever their goods were, to the lord. They had limited personal freedoms, and often it would be the lords who would take those goods and take the cattle and take the sheep, and they would throw these lavish parties. Serfs weren't often invited to, and so they watched a lot of their hard work go to other people. And again, not a whole lot of personal freedom, not a whole lot that they could do about it. And the system was resistant to change and innovation. There's a lot of, the research says self-sufficient nature of manners discouraged trade and the adoption of new technologies. And so, sometimes you think about things like at some point, when the catapult came into town, right, that was a new thing and that was a big deal, or the plow, or just think about some of the technologies that were higher tech than that for us were like, yeah, that's Stone Age stuff. Well, there was a time where that was new and revolutionary, and sometimes those things were not welcome under the feudalism system, because the more innovation that you allow to come in, the more that you enable your serfs, or in that case, you could think of it maybe even as employees, to be able to make their jobs easier or more efficient. As the person in charge, that becomes a threat. You start to lose a little bit of authority. You start to lose your influence and your power, because they can simply turn around and upend whatever your system is. And that's where we had a lot of revolutions start under that system. So that's feudalism for you. Let's look now at mercantilism. Feudalism at some point began to decline. Mercantilism was kind of the bridge. And it's an economic practice that was dominant in Europe, predominantly dominant in Europe from the 16th to about the 18th centuries or so, kind of right as our beautiful country was getting its legs. All right, so some quick upsides to mercantilism. First, it focused on increasing a nation's wealth by maximizing exports and accumulating precious metals like gold and silver. And it aimed to build national power and secure a country's economic and political dominance, right? So he who has the gold makes the rules, right? That's the golden rule from back in the day. That's kind of where this started. Actually, that's not true. It probably started long before that, way back in ancient history, but this is where it kind of got its ground. It also promoted the establishment of industries within each individual country, protecting them through things like tariffs and trade restrictions, if that sounds familiar. We certainly have had a fair bit of that over the past few years. But mercantilism also helped spur industrial growth. And so the protectionism of each nation encouraged the development of local industries and reduced dependence on foreign goods. And you do that certainly through the tariff process. You make it more expensive to bring goods in or to push your goods out, and it can lead to some protectionism there. Okay, it also, through industrial growth, it promoted the establishment of. No, I think I've already said this. Yep. Okay. Sorry, I'm reading too many notes and I went backwards. Next, colonial expansion. So mercantilist policies supported the establishment and expansion of colonies. Colonies provided raw materials to the mother country, served as markets for finished goods, creating a cycle that benefited the home country's economy. I want you to think about that, because that's exactly where the United States of America got its start, right? We started as colonies, as an outpost of the British Empire. We were producing goods and agriculture and relationships and things like that. Now, I'm going to set aside that there were some atrocities that were done to Native peoples during that time period. So let me just acknowledge that. I'm going to set it aside. But for the British Crown, a lot of goods were going back to Britain. We weren't getting the representation. We were getting all of the taxation, and that led to the Boston Tea Party, and that led to, and now we're 248 years down the road as of the most recent Independence Day celebration. For job creation, back to mercantilism, it focused on building domestic industries and infrastructure that led to job creation. It reduced unemployment, so most people were working, and because they were working, actually some of the conditions got a little bit better from a living standpoint, certainly compared to the prior regime of feudalism. It actually started to give people a little more economic mobility, a little bit more freedom in what they were doing and how they were able to provide for themselves. Now, some of the downsides would be trade conflicts and wars. The aggressive pursuit of favorable trade balances and economic dominance naturally resulted in international tensions and military confrontations. We certainly know how that played out through history. It was a little bit inefficient economically because imports were restricted. It controlled local markets. The policies under mercantilism can stifle competition and innovation. It led to higher prices. It could lead to lower quality goods. Again, it's very familiar to some of the things that we see still today. The colonial exploitation was was prevalent because the system relied heavily on the exploitation of colonies, where the raw materials were extracted at a low cost. They were sent to the mother company. The colonies were forced to provide and buy finished goods then from the mother company. So they had to send materials. Mother company sent back goods that they then had to buy. And so you can see where that started to lead to some economic strife. And by protecting domestic industries from foreign competition, again through high tariffs on imports, mercantilism could result in less efficient production and higher costs for goods and services, as we just said in that example where the mother country sent back the goods that had to be bought, or they were taxed on the goods that they were producing or the goods that they were buying, that kind of thing. So that is, mercantilism kind of led its way to what we now know, again, a bit as capitalism. But the one system, there's actually maybe two, that people point to as being better than capitalism. And these are the two that really piss me off the most, because I think most of the people who say that these are better systems have never lived under these systems and don't really understand how they work. And so the first one, my second least favorite ism, socialism. Doesn't taste very good in my mouth. So socialism is an economic and political system where the means of production, distribution, exchange, they're all owned and regulated by the community as a whole and often represented by the state. So we all share. It's utopian. We all get along. Everybody does everything for everybody. Dear brother, right? Here's some upsides of socialism, because I guess there are a couple, and I'll try to say them with a straight face. So anyway, the upsides of socialism are that it aims to reduce wealth disparity by redistributing. I can barely say the word. Redistributing resources more evenly across society. Everybody gets to share. Essential services such as healthcare, education, and social welfare are often provided by the state, and it ensures that all citizens have access regardless of their financial situation. Now, that one I don't as much have as big of a problem with. However, it comes at a very high cost to make that happen. So that aside, okay. By focusing on the collective well-being, socialism seeks to address social injustices and provides equal opportunities for all. Josh, are you buying any of this? Okay, he says no. Okay, and then the last upside, government intervention in the economy can help create jobs, reduce unemployment, because the state can invest in public works and infrastructure projects. Now, the thing about the upsides of socialism is they automatically feed into the downsides, because everything sounds great, but what most people do not consider is what it cost everybody to be able to run the system. And so socialism runs directly counter with capitalism. And I'm going to talk a little bit about where socialism leads, and that's going to go to my least favorite ism. But the thing with social policies is that we often, especially in this country, and this is an aside, it's not my notes, this is my opinion. In this country, anybody who promotes the tenets of socialism as being good, they always point to a country like Denmark. And they say, well, they can do it in Denmark. And Denmark has a high tax rate, but the people are happy and everything works well. That sounds amazing. Denmark is a country of 5.3 million people. The United States is a country of 331 million people. So I can probably get 5.35 million people to get totally distracted by, Hoc toi or whatever we're doing these days. And we can all agree that it's funny. 5.3 million of us are probably passing some meme of Hoc toi around right now, right? Okay. But that doesn't work for 331 million people, and neither does socialism, because it's way different when you take a very, very small subset of people who have been under the same system forever versus a group of people who collectively, in our DNA as a country, do not agree with just about anything, right? That's who we are as a people. Like, we have the Bill of Rights because we don't want to be governed tightly. We don't want to be told what to do. We don't want to be forced into servitude or a political regime or a religious leaning or the inability to have our free speech or, damn it, the inability to have guns, right? We want our protections from illegal imprisonment and from quartering of soldiers and all the things that are in the Bill of Rights, which, by the way, are the first 10 amendments of the Constitution. We want those things. And so socialism does not work well for a bunch of people who are not going to get along to go along. Just not who we are as a people. So anyway, okay, the downsides of socialism. First, bureaucracy, and lack of competition results in lower productivity, you don't say, and lower innovation when compared to capitalist economies. Number two, there may be less motivation for individuals to work hard. They're not going to be wanting. They're not going to want to take risks, and they're not going to want to innovate because there's no incentive. Because the more that they produce, the more that they have to then give away to other people. This plays very much into the hands of, if you read a book like Atlas Shrugged, or even if you start to watch a movie like 1984, or read that book, it plays very well into where this disintegrates. And so there's no motivation for you to continue to produce something when it's just going to be taken from you. High levels of state control and regulation can lead to a loss of personal freedoms and autonomy. That's a given. Absolutely, because nothing is yours. You don't own it. It belongs to the community as a whole. Anything that you have, any resource that you have, is shared. So there's no perfect way for you to have your own thing, right? High taxation and government spending, because there's no other. The government has to tax you at a high rate to be able to spend at a high rate, which is what it costs, what it takes to run a true socialist country. By the way, I talked about Denmark. That's not even a true pure socialist country. It's a blend of socialist capitalist type economies. So it's not even pure socialism. Anyway, the government has to tax you at a high rate in order for them to be able to spend and provide the resources for the community. So it's going to lead to deficits. It's going to lead to economic instability if not managed properly, and it very rarely is ever truly managed properly. So countries that are explicitly socialist and have strong socialist policies are going to include countries like, no surprise, China, Cuba, Laos, North Korea, and Vietnam, and other countries that have significant socialist influences or are governed by socialist parties are going to include Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Venezuela, and Tanzania. And historically, when we look at what happened in Germany in the 1930s, that was the rise of socialism that led to what happened in that country. And for a lot of reasons, you'd have to go back and read history. It's not as simple as just, because socialism, then we had the Holocaust. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that the rise of the National Socialist Party, which we know as the Nazis, we saw where that ends up. So anyway, just as an aside, go read some history if you want to do a little bit of background on whether or not this is good for us. The definition and practice of socialism can vary very widely. Many countries incorporate some socialist principles into different extents with broader political and economic systems, like I said, very much like when we look at some of the European countries. There are also democratic socialist countries, and democratic socialism refers to a political and economic system where social ownership of the means of production exists along with political democracy. And so those systems aim to achieve socialist goals such as reducing inequality in wealth and provide some social welfare, but it maintains democratic governance and individual freedoms. And so there's a few countries who have this type of system. I already talked about Denmark. Sweden, Norway, Finland, and even France are known for these types of systems. And so there's a lot of information here on each of those countries. I'm not going to read through them, but they have those 5 or 4 countries in particular, Sweden, Norway, France, and Finland, have some really interesting nuances with those systems. So that's socialism. As you know, I have a strong opinion about this. If you haven't picked that up already, let's talk about my least favoritism, communism. And the ultimate aim of communism is to create a society where there are no social classes, there are no exploitation of workers, and there are no economic inequalities. And I'm going to pause for all the people who have died because that's what the aim was. Okay, so upsides of communism, this is going to be even harder to say with a straight face because I can't help but think of all the things in history where communism has just completely failed, and the people are the ones who ultimately take the brunt of the force of what communism does to people and what it does to countries, and it's not a good thing. But I'll read the research. So the upsides. Number 1, communism aims to eliminate class distinctions by ensuring that wealth and resources are distributed according to individual needs. That sounds not amazing. Okay, number 2. In theory, workers would no longer be exploited by capitalists, because we're horrible people, as everyone contributes and benefits from the collective wealth. Number 3, because there are no economic disparities, there may be fewer social tensions and conflicts. I guess because if you're starving and your neighbor's starving, you can't fight over the food, right? Okay. Anyway, less conflicts. Number 4, the government can direct resources toward long-term goals that they hold, such as industrialization, infrastructure development, social services. Potentially leads to rapid societal improvements in certain areas. That's a very nebulous statement. So those are the apparent upsides. Let's talk about the definite downsides, which are without the motivation of personal financial gain, individuals may lack the incentive to work hard, to innovate, or to take risks. Not all that different than socialism, but definitely true under communism. Bureaucratic, I'm having a hard time talking here. Bureaucratic decision-making may lead to shortages, surpluses, and poor quality of goods and services, which is a given. In practice, communist regimes often become authoritarian. It suppresses political dissent. It eliminates personal liberties in the process. Examples of communist states such as the former Soviet Union, China under Chairman Mao, they have demonstrated significant problems, including political repression, economic inefficiencies, human rights abuses, and when we say human rights abuses, let me just go ahead and just say death. It's total deaths, because if you're a dissent from the party, the dear leader, the mother country, the fatherland, whatever it is, if you're a dissident, you're marked. And if you try to go underground and help people, you're marked. If you're trying to get people out of those systems, you're marked. And so that becomes, again, very authoritarian. Communism almost always in history disintegrates into those types of systems. There are 5 countries in the world that are officially recognized as communist states. I already talked about China because they have socialist policies, but they are a communist state. Cuba, which famously got stuck in the 1950s for 60 years. Laos, which had a mass exodus in the 70s, 80s, and 90s because of the number of people who were caught up and were oppressed, enslaved, and killed. North Korea, which we know a lot about, and Vietnam, which we know an awful lot about. Notice that those 5 countries were also identified as having strong socialist policies. So how can they operate with socialist policies while being under communist regimes? It seems like maybe there would be a little bit of conflict there. Well, those countries identify as socialist states in the process of building socialism with the ultimate goal of achieving communism. So let me say that again. They start with socialist policies and they move down the track, but the ultimate goal is to take socialism straight into communism, which is almost always a hard socialist policy, almost always disintegrates into communism, and almost always disintegrates into authoritarianism and utilitarianism of its people. Strong socialist policies that these types of governments implement, such as the extensive state control, social welfare programs, economic planning, the lack of personal property ownership, they're all in line with socialist principles. However, they tend to maintain a single party system, which make their elections fair and reasonable and equitable, by the way. Those single party systems control the state, which means they control the production. And those are key characteristics of ultimately what become communist regimes. So you have to ask yourself, if that's what we have to live with, are you truly happy? If you're listening to this podcast, I got to think that we have a similar mindset. Maybe we don't, but maybe we do. You got to think to yourself, would you really want to be in a system where whatever you did mattered not for you? It didn't benefit you anymore because it got shared amongst everybody else, and because you were taxed at such a high rate that you kept very little of the means of production that you produced and brought home for your family, which lowers, right? The less you keep, the lower your quality of life, but you have to share that with everybody. Is that exciting? If you look at the recent news, there was an election in France, and there was a surprise win, and this is just in the news this week. Surprising win from the far left side of the political spectrum. And these people, now here's the thing. When you look at who these people are, they're younger. They are typically educated. They are typically not working. And they want the government to provide services for them so that way their lives aren't as hard as our lives are, right? Because we have to work and we have to buy stuff and we have to pay for health care and we have to pay for the dentist and we have to, pay taxes, but we get to invest money. And then because we get to invest money, then it creates economic disparities. And then, all these other, they see these disintegrations on the capitalist side. These people are calling for the government to pay for these essential services. They're calling for the government to put in a 90% tax rate on wealthy people in France. And the problem with that is if you're looking at a 90% tax rate at the personal level, I can't imagine what that looks like at the business level, because they also call for the government to start increasing taxes on business income. Who's going to want to invest in France? If you're a business and you're a multinational, why would you pick France? You can't pay your people enough to have a sustainable living because it's going to get taxed away. And if you have a business there, your profits are going to get sucked out by the government. And what are they going to do with it? They're going to mismanage it. They're going to put it into essential services. They're going to create these bloated bureaucracies and these big departments full of a bunch of people who push paper around. Probably the same piece of paper gets pushed around 50 or 60 times. It's not all that different than what happens in our government, because we have these big bloated departments and these acronym 3-letter agencies that don't really do a whole lot for us, but try to continue to over-govern and write new rules and new rules and new rules, stacked on top of rules. It's all bureaucratic stuff. It doesn't benefit anybody. So what good is it? Why would you want to do that? And if you're a person who thinks that these systems are good, why? What is it in your education process that has led you to think that this is the way that things should be? Is it because you have a bleeding heart and because you see disparity and because you want to fix that? Overtaxing people is not the way to fix that, right? There's a lot of good that you can do in the world by having available profits, by keeping taxes low for people so they can do the things that they need to do to get themselves out of poverty, to get themselves out of adverse economic systems. You can't do that by taking more and more and more and more resources to give to somebody else, so that way they don't have the incentive to work hard, right? So the person who's receiving doesn't have the incentive, and the person who's being stolen from, yes, I said those words, right? If you're overtaxing me, you are stealing from me and my production to give it to somebody else. Now, I'm not incentivized, and neither is that person. What are we doing? What good is this? Right? It doesn't make sense to me. So let's go back to talking about something that's more fun, the free market capitalism system. And just the words coming out of my mouth make me so happy. I enjoy it. I enjoy capitalism. Okay, so now that we've covered all those other systems, let's talk about the free market system. But before we do, let me just give a quick note on the origin of the term capitalism, because I think it's important. And I looked this up because I wanted to know what the history of the system and the word was and that kind of thing. So the first recorded use of capitalism was in 1854 by the English novelist William Thackeray, who used it to refer to or describe the private ownership of money and capital. The term gained broader use in the late 19th century, particularly among socialists, who used it disparagingly to critique the economic system characterized by private ownership and private profit motive. It was popularized in academic and political discourse, especially in Germany, which I talked about, and later became widely used in discussions about economic systems in the 20th century. So capitalism and the rise of the term was used disparagingly. It wasn't a term that was used with any sort of, good intended, benevolent, wonderful things. It was used as a disparaging term by socialists because they're boring people anyway. So whatever. The development of capitalism as an economic system can be traced back to the early modern period in Europe, particularly during the decline of feudalism, the rise of mercantilism, as I said earlier. And in later, the Industrial Revolution of the 18th century further solidified the principles of capitalism. It emphasized private ownership, market competition, and the accumulation of capital for profit. Now, as I said at the very beginning, it's not without its own issues. So just as I did for all the other systems, I'm going to give the upsides of free market capitalism, and I'm going to give the downsides, and, see what we think. So first, the upsides: economic efficiency. Free market capitalism promotes efficiency in production and resource allocation through competition. I said competition? Competition. Oh, no. Okay. Companies strive to produce better goods and services at lower cost to attract consumers. And it leads to innovation. It leads to technological advancements like your iPhones and your Androids and your coffee cups and things like that. Okay. Consumer choice. It offers a wide variety, or when there's a wide variety of goods and services, consumers have numerous choices. And the market, when it's operating efficiently, the consumers can dictate which goods and services are better. They vote with their wallets, right? So if you like something better than other, if something tastes better than the other thing, that's very similar. If you prefer this kind of coffee versus that kind of coffee, if you like this salon service versus that one, you vote with your wallet. Consumers have choices. It's a beautiful thing. Wealth creation is a natural result because by allowing private ownership and profit motive, individuals and businesses are incentivized to invest, innovate, and work hard, leading to increased productivity and wealth creation and wealth accumulation by more people. It provides individuals with the economic freedom to pursue their own economic interests. They can start businesses. They can invest in opportunities that they find promising. They can work for a company their whole life. They can work hard to climb the ladder. You can do what you want to do. Your freedom leads to higher levels of personal and economic fulfillment. Again, there are some exceptions where the system doesn't work, and that's going to lead me to the downsides, because under free market capitalism, not everybody ends up the same. And so one of the major criticisms is that it leads to significant income and wealth disparities. And those with capital and resources can accumulate more wealth, while others in the same economy struggle to make ends meet. Free markets can sometimes fail to provide essential services efficiently, and it leads to issues like monopolies. It leads to problems that can be very difficult, such as pollution or waste that needs to be cleaned up, or toxic chemicals in water, things like that. It leads to public goods problems. Often those kinds of things will require government intervention to correct. Number 3, the profit motive can sometimes lead to the exploitation of workers, with businesses prioritizing cost cutting over fair wages and safe working conditions. Now, historically, we saw a lot of this in the rise of the industrial age or the Industrial Revolution. Some of our heroes of old capitalism, we think of Andrew Carnegie, we think of J.P. Morgan, we think of Henry Ford, we think of Standard Oil, we think of all these kinds of companies, and especially with Andrew Carnegie with U.S. Steel, that company was known for having really poor and unsafe and dangerous working conditions. And at the time, Andrew Carnegie was one of the wealthiest people in the world by any measure. And so there's definitely some issues there. I mean, certainly with programs like through NAFTA, as an example, a lot of good U.S. jobs went overseas, and those overseas jobs turned into sweatshops and underage, producers and things like that. I mean, there are a lot of places where this goes wrong, and it certainly can become an issue for certain people. So the last thing is that capitalist economies can experience significant cycles of boom and bust, leading to periods of economic instability, leading to periods of higher unemployment, leading to financial crises, leading to recessions, and things like that. So when we think about everything with all of these systems, is none are perfect, and it's because they're all ran by humans, and humans are imperfect. You might think you're perfect. Sometimes I do, but I know better, and I think you probably do too. But one of my favorite people in history, Sir Winston Churchill, famously remarked, "Indeed," and this is a quote, "indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government except for all those other forms that have been tried from time to time." And he said that during a speech of the House of Commons on November 11th, 1947. I'll read the quote one more time because you probably have heard this misquoted. And what he said was, "Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government except all those other forms that have been tried from time to time." The quote that you've probably heard somebody say that capitalism is the worst form of economic systems except for all the other ones that have been tried. But Winston Churchill never said that. Adam Smith never said that. And so it's often misattributed, but I would personally, Dale Shafer, be inclined to say that. I would be inclined to say that capitalism is the worst form of economic systems except for all the other ones that have been tried. And for all the reasons stated, again, the free market system with all of its good, the bad, the ugly, the mishaps, the economic instability, the recessions, there is an awful lot of good that comes through that, through the hard times. And it truly gives us the best economic advantage and the best economic opportunities of anywhere in the world. And if you still disagree with me, it might be time to take your iPhone or your Android device or your iPad or your MacBook or whatever it is that you're using to tell other people that this thing is terrible, throw it out the window, smash it, cancel your summer travel plans, cancel all your streaming subscriptions. By the way, stop watching Netflix, stop watching the Disney Plus channel, stop watching Paramount, stop watching all those shows, stop going to movie theaters, stop buying rings for your little nose, all that stuff. Stop that, right? Don't do any of that stuff, because you should happily sign up to pay higher taxes and do that for the benefit of your neighbors. Right? And if you don't like those options, here's an idea for you. Enjoy capitalism. It's a wonderful thing. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on the various economic systems and, of course, the free market system. Drop a comment. Like I said, I've had an awful lot of my opinions in this episode. And if you agree with them, give me a thumbs up. Tell me, attaboy. If you disagree, send me all the hate mail. I can't wait to read it. I'd love to know what you think. Send it to info@lifemoveswealth.com. Drop a comment on this episode. Share it. Whether you like it or you don't, I'm happy to talk about it. And that's it. So thanks for listening to the episode. I cannot wait to get some hate mail from this thing, and I hope that I do. But we'll see what happens. So anyway, until next time, go be financially awesome. Enjoy capitalism, baby. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share. To learn more about your financial purpose, visit lifemoveswealth.com.